Hi, I'm Eric Lanask. We're here at this year's Real-Time Web Solutions Conference in New York City. Joining me this morning is Alan Percy from Dialogic. Alan, great to see you again.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
So we've been at a number of these web solutions and WebRTC conferences. And I think the one thing that is very noticeable this time around is the number of conversations and examples of different real use cases.
Right, yeah. Well, matter of fact, that's probably, if anything, what's really different about this particular week and this particular year is now we're, instead of talking about the technology and talking about what's possible, now we're starting to talk about situations that are actual, really deployed, and starting to see some actual customer use cases being discussed in some of the sessions.
Is that really just a question of WebRTC and just real-time communications in general maturing a little bit more?
So I think what we're starting to see now is, there's platforms that can deliver on the promises, right? So now we're starting to see, elements of the network, and we're starting to see applications that are being built based on WebRTC. And so maybe, a couple examples is, we just finished up a session on financial services, WebRTC and financial services. And then in a particular session, one of our partners, Quobus, talked about how they've been using video and WebRTC-enabled video applications to do identity verification and some other, theft prevention techniques, allowing the bank to have, a greater connection with their customers and also meet compliance requirements from some of the government sort of a fraud protection regulations and identity verification. So really, really interesting story now. We're starting to see, actual implementations. They're not theoretical anymore. They're actual customer use cases.
So, Sterling, you mentioned financial services. We've heard a lot about healthcare. Are there other specific verticals that we're starting to see a little more pickup in?
Yeah, so in addition to financial services, right, so there's much discussion about contact center kind of applications, right? So people are, one of the key things I think that Quentin made in his presentation from Cafe X is that there are certain applications where video and the experience of a WebRTC application makes sense and others don't, right? So a low-value transaction that would be in a contact center doesn't make any sense to try to move that to a contact center. But a high-value one, like financial services is a good example, or healthcare, where there's a high value, high transaction value, certainly makes sense to start to include, a contact center kind of, or video-based contact center. So, sort of a perspective you can think in terms of, a kiosk at a car dealership that the bank would put in that would give an opportunity for, an individual to sit with a loan officer is just, one of many examples of the kinds of applications.
So when you talk about something like that, they'll take the loan officer example. That takes a little bit of the traditional personalization out of it because you're not going down to your local bank office. Instead, you might be talking to a loan officer halfway or all the way across the country. Does that matter, or do we not need that one-on-one personalization anymore?
Well, what's interesting about that is that it might reduce the amount of brick and mortar that might be necessary, which banks are constantly sort of stressing with that, right? And there's a generation of people coming, behind us that are not necessarily real keen to go to a branch or to physically wait in line at a branch or wait for a loan officer. And at the same time, too, it gives you a subject matter expert almost instantly. So instead of talking to somebody in the branch who maybe does a loan once in a while, instead now you're talking to somebody who does loans all the time and maybe has some decision-making capabilities, so you might know the answer immediately. So it shifts from, having a face live in person to instead speaking to a subject matter expert or decision maker, which I think in most cases, most people would rather get the right answer, the final answer more quickly, even if it's over a video conference call that's WebRTC enabled, than it would be to necessarily go into a branch and sit down. But nonetheless, you're still with insurance, and banking, and financial services, and healthcare, and other like that. There's still always going to be a place for brick and mortar. It's a way to augment that with video.
Now, this is all happening. All these WebRTC implementations are all happening without true standardization having happened yet. So, what is driving that? Obviously, the players in the market have said, "Okay, we don't need to have those standards finalized. We're going to push this stuff out."
Well, there's been consolidation around a couple of maybe not necessarily standards, but some consolidations around techniques. Or for example, using SIP as, for example, is a call control protocol. There's libraries that offer that, open source libraries that make it very easy for developers to build their applications based on that. Decisions on codecs and things like that. There tend to be sort of paths of least resistance, which seem to be being followed at this point. So maybe there's sort of de facto standards as opposed to formal standards. Nonetheless, still some of the browser compatibility issues and things like that are still topics that got a lot of airtime this week, matter of fact, at the conference, and continue to be, a goal to get Safari and, Explorer and some of these other platforms all in line.
So now that we've gotten to a certain point where we have some live use cases out there that people are talking about, what's next?
Right. So next is expanding the developer community, and that's something that we're working on. We're starting to realize, okay, so WebRTC now is matured to the point where we can start to bring in web developers to start to bring this voice and video capabilities into more web applications. So one of the areas that we're focusing on this fall is starting to educate web developer community, and with a series of seminars that we're going to be introducing this fall. Starting September 27th in our Parsippany office, we're going to show, we're going to have a one-day seminar where people can come in, they can learn how to use high-level APIs and high-level development environment that combines, WebRTC, media processing, and voice and video enable a lot of these websites that today are just sort of dumb websites that don't have that ability.
Well, good. Sounds like there's a lot of exciting stuff in the future. I look forward to seeing all of it.
Yeah, it should be exciting. So we'll look forward to having everyone there.
Alan, thanks for being here.
You bet. Thanks.